What if we lived in a world where research defines company strategy? What would that world look like? How would it feel to be a researcher in that world? And most importantly, what changes would you need to make to your research practice or your research methods to get to that world? I think the key to that world is strategic research. And to me, that means two very specific things. The first is it's about either defining company level strategy or enabling company level strategy. Specifically, I think that means defining or writing the 2021 OKRs or the goals for 2021 to 2025 at your company. And the second is about enabling those strategies or those goals to come to life through research. So what that means is really rewriting or reframing some of the 2021 to 2025 goals, OKRs, etc. And I think we can do this, we can achieve this world of research defining company level strategy together. This is something I spend almost my entire day thinking about because I lead a strategic research team at Spotify, and we're particularly focused on defining and enabling business unit level strategy. So what that means is Spotify has 4 major business units. So I help to write and enable the strategies for our advertising business unit. And there are really 2 things that stand out about my team. The first is that we're a highly mixed methods team. So we're made up of many insights disciplines, including user research, data science, and behavioral science. And the second thing, maybe the most important thing, is that the folks that we work with day in and day out are leadership. So these are executives on the product side or the business side that help to set the direction of the business unit strategy and ultimately, together with the other business units, the company level strategy as well. And so it's our job as a strategic research team to help drive the right projects, to enable our leadership teams to define the direction of strategy and really enable that strategy to come to life because of what we know to be true about our users and their experience every day with Spotify Free. So this is a bit about my experience, but honestly, I think this experience is applicable to anyone sitting in this room because I wasn't hired into this role. I came from an embedded product research role and slowly started doing more and more strategic research until it eventually morphed into being my full-time job and our team's full-time focus. So let's talk a little bit about how strategic research differs from maybe product or design research. The first thing to know is that the sole focus of strategic research is about enabling and defining 2021 to 2025 goals, OKRs, and strategies for our business unit that will ultimately funnel up to company level strategy as well. So this sounds a bit nebulous. Let's break it down with an example. So one particular project that we did was focused on the ads and the messaging experience for Spotify Free listeners. So we noticed that these experiences from a listener's point of view were pretty similar. The ads and messages looked pretty similar, and we're trying to get listeners to do the same thing, which is interact with content that is relevant to them. And then internally, what was interesting was that these were very different teams. They operated different engineering systems, different ML models ruled these different experiences, and fundamentally, there was no strategy or unification across these teams. And we thought this was a really important area for research, because if we got to better understand the user experience, that would help us organizationally really align and therefore achieve goals to better that user experience together. So this ads and messaging research was focused on the question of how do Spotify Free listeners experience the ads and messaging experience while listening to their podcasts and music. And the output of this strategic research was really 3 key things. The first was that it created a brand new 2020 business unit level objective. It was added to the board as the 5th one of our focus areas. The second thing was it changed organizationally how we operate. It brought those 2 teams, the one that focused on ads and the one that focused on messages, together so we could better collaborate, build bridges across our engineering and ML systems so that they could operate more cohesively. And the third thing it did was it changed internally how we think about and how we have the language to describe our ads and messaging experiences so that we have a better understanding of our users' experience and can speak about it more accurately as a result. So this type of strategic research is pretty different than if we were doing product or design research, where the outcomes of that same project might have been more so focused on the UX or the UI changes to those individual product experiences. Or it might have influenced the product roadmap of how we build out or sequence features for each of those teams. So note that strategic research has influence at much more the leadership level here, where we're focused on the goals of the leadership team, we're focused on the strategies for how they execute to achieve those goals, we're focused on organizational structures, revenue streams often, and how we speak about experiences as a company. And the reason that that's important is because if research has a seat at that table, where we're looking at, from a leadership's perspective, how we orient and where we aim as a company, that will influence all of the decisions that get handled below, whether that's at the group product level or teams of business people as well, or even the individual day-to-day decisions that PMs, engineers, designers, etc. make when building out these features. So that's what makes strategic research different. It's focused on defining new company level or business unit level strategies and enabling these strategies to come to life through evidence-backed decision making. So that's what strategic research is and how those projects differ from product or design research. But let's talk about how we actually do strategic research. The first thing was a fundamental shift in how we think about research as a team. So what I mean by this is if we think about a flow where users interact with a product that generates business outcomes, typically user research just fits in the first two sections, where we really deeply understand users, and then we understand users' interactions with those product experiences. And that's critically important because we must design useful, delightful, and really usable experiences so that users do enjoy and actually use products. But oftentimes, I think user research could actually benefit from spanning the entire spectrum. So not just users' interactions with products, but also how that generates business outcomes. If we're able to tie a thread through all of those components, we're able to reach a wider audience at the company because our insights and our learnings become applicable not just to product teams, but to business teams as well, or just a wider audience at the company. So this was a fundamental shift in how we think about research. Research isn't just users and products. It's really the entire spectrum of how users interact with a product that generates a business outcome. And it's our job to really understand the breadth of that entire experience so that we can define and enable new strategies at the business unit or company level. So now that we've defined what strategic research is, let's talk about how we do it. So I think there are really three key ingredients for strategic research. The first is identifying gaps in current strategy, because this will help us identify the right projects to take on and the right research questions to tackle. The second is about doing multidisciplinary research. So this is not just doing mixed methods research, but actually partnering with other insights disciplines to counterbalance the strengths and weaknesses of each discipline to ultimately generate comprehensive answers to those research questions we've just identified. And lastly, it's about driving product and business impact, therefore wider company level impact from our research projects. And the reason that this is really powerful is because I've observed in our team's work that it really creates this flywheel effect, where if we identify the right projects to tackle by deeply understanding company or business unit level strategy, we pick the right questions, we answer them holistically through multidisciplinary research, and then we generate product and business implications from that research, therefore reaching a wider audience. It answers that really scary, nebulous question that we had at the start, which is, where should we be focused as a business unit or company, and how can we get there? And in doing so, I found that leaders come right back to me with the next set of scary open questions that they need research to help answer or give direction to. So let's talk about each in a little bit more detail. starting with identifying gaps in current strategy. So to do this, on our team, we think really deeply and really critically about our strategy. We think a lot about questions like, what keeps our leadership teams up at night? What are their riskiest assumptions or bets that we don't yet know enough about as a company or as a team, but that we really could in order to drive really data-driven strategy? All right, let's dig into the first ingredient with a little bit more detail. This is about identifying gaps in current strategy. To do this, our team thinks really critically about where the business unit or the company is headed and how we plan to get there, identifying what's data-driven and what's assumptions or hypothesis, and really carve out the spaces for projects that will enable us to have a data-driven direction or strategy. So the more you know about what your leadership's open questions are, the more you'll be able to proactively identify the right projects to take on. Some questions to ask yourself are, what keeps your leadership teams up at night? What are they worried about? Or what do they not have enough information about in order to make the right decisions? The second is, what are their goals for the next 1 to 5 years? What is the company or team aiming to do? And how do they plan to get there? These two questions will help you really understand the gaps in current strategy, meaning things that leadership teams aren't thinking about yet, but maybe should be, or for existing strategy that we have, what we don't yet know enough about in order to flesh out a game plan for. Let's dive back into our ads and messaging experience. We actually came up with this project because of dog fooding. So dog fooding, for those who might not be familiar with the term, is basically just about using your product and trying to maintain a more objective or listener-based viewpoint as opposed to thinking about it from our own internal organizational structure. So from dog fooding, one of the things we observed was that the ads and message experience looked very similar. And this was for good reason. They were both trying to get listeners to do the same thing, which is engage with content that's most relevant to them. But the interesting thing was that organizationally, these two systems were housed in very different teams that had very different engineering and ML systems behind them, without much communication across teams or across systems. These teams had different strategies. They had different OKRs, they had different goals. And we thought this is a really interesting discrepancy between what potentially the listener experience is like and how internally we actually represent this experience or build this experience. So to do this project, we really wanted to dig in to understand what is the listener's perspective of the ads and message experience, and what does that mean for how we should organizationally set up to best deliver that experience and monetize that experience where appropriate. So this project came to be because of dog fooding, but that's not the only way you can identify gaps in strategy. The first and probably the most important is talking to folks on your leadership teams, getting time with executives where you can, or asking your manager's manager to better understand how leadership are thinking about their long-term plans and what the game plan looks like to get there. Another thing that we do on our team quite a lot is digesting and absorbing strategy documents. So anytime there's anything released about a 2021 goal or etc., we want to devour that type of content and really understand what's data-driven versus what's backed by an assumption, a hypothesis, or an educated guess. And really digging into those components, and oftentimes having follow-up conversations with leadership as well, have helped us to identify the right questions to start. There are other ways. Dog fooding is one example, or another example could be monitoring the data in any sort of key metrics that you have and observing if there are any interesting trends that you don't know why they're happening. Those could be really interesting areas to better dig in to understand what's going on with your business or your product and how we can better set up a future for success there. So, in thinking about key ingredient 1, the most important thing to do is soaking up all of the strategy information you can, whether that's by talking to leaders, talking to managers, reading documents, and then critically thinking about what's data-driven versus what could actually be benefited from more data and insights to back it up. So that's how we identify the right projects to tackle. And that's really step 1. But it's a really important step because I think if you de-risk the most risky, scary assumptions that leaders have, and then you prove to do the right research and answer those questions, they'll just come back to you with the same set of the next hairy, scary strategic questions that they have. So this is really the most important way in developing that two-way conversation with your leadership teams, is by proactively identifying the right questions to tackle. And that's what kickstarts this flywheel. The second step is really about multidisciplinary research. So as I mentioned, on my team in particular, that includes user research, data science, and behavioral science. And I think these three methods are really superpowered together. But oftentimes, we also partner with market research, data visualization, analytics engineering, and other insights disciplines, depending on the project or the research questions that we need to answer at that point in time. So, regardless of your organizational structure, how can you find the right insights partners to tackle some of these hairy, scary strategic research questions? If you have folks on your team who are of other disciplines, how can you partner with them or partner with other teams in your organization to get access to that skill set? And even if they're not in your organization, can you hire or partner with vendors, contractors, etc., to still gain access to that skill set in the most efficient way that makes sense for you and your team? And the reason that that's important is because multidisciplinary research really generates comprehensive answers. So, for example, if we jump back into the ads and messaging case study, where we're taking a look at what the Spotify free listener experience is with the ads and messaging experiences while they're listening to their podcasts and music, we decided to study this question through a multidisciplinary approach of user research and data science. These insights disciplines make perfect partners because each have access to questions that others might not. And I'll explain this through a 2x2 framework. So if we map out our methods from quantitative data to qualitative data, where quantitative data is looking at the scale of hundreds of thousands, millions, even trillions of data points, and qualitative data is looking at anything as small to even interviewing a handful of participants. Quantitative data is really good at answering these what questions, like what is happening at scale in our data. And really, data scientists are most at home in that particular quadrant, which is quantitative and behavioral data, where behavioral data is observing the actions that users take on our service. So through methods like A/B testing, statistical modeling, or even data tracking, they're really good at answering these what questions, which is what is happening at scale in our data, what is the feature usage patterns for these particular experiences, etc. User researchers, on the other hand, are really good at answering why questions, like why we are observing the patterns that we are at scale. And usually that's through understanding the individual's mental models, motivations, and use cases for a particular feature or experience, and then being able to really understand the nuances of that and why they add up to the trends that we then observe in the data. So as you can see, user research and data science are really nicely complementary partners, where data science can answer these what questions through quantitative and behavioral data, whereas user research fills out the rest of the framework, really digging into why those trends happen as they do. And the real power of multidisciplinary research is that it enables us to triangulate. What we mean by triangulation is that we point different methods or different disciplines at the same question at the same time, and therefore we counterbalance the strengths and weaknesses of each, such that we generate a more comprehensive answer than one method or one insights discipline could alone. Because each insights discipline, it brings together its strengths and weaknesses, and the strengths get compounded, while the weaknesses get mitigated by complementary methods. So identifying the right insights partners become really important because that's what enables us to generate comprehensive answers to those scary strategic questions that we are asking at the beginning. So jumping back into our ads and messaging example here. In this particular case, we did user research, which was particularly a diary study and follow-up user interviews, alongside data science, which was exploratory data analysis. So what that means was, from a user research perspective, we were really interested in understanding the mental models and perceptions that Spotify free listeners had with these ads and messages experiences. How did they perceive these experiences? What was it like to get them day in and day out while listening to Spotify? And then how did they categorize these messages? How did they make sense of what was an ad versus a message, and did it matter to them? And then if we look at the data science side, they looked at these same observations at scale. How many ads and messages were people getting, and how did that differ day in and day out? And what was really powerful was that these methods weren't done in isolation. We were triangulating these insights every single day throughout the research. And this became really important because without the user research, we wouldn't have been able to understand users' perceptions or mental models of what ads and messaging looked like on Spotify from their point of view. But then without the data science, we wouldn't have been able to scale these findings and really understand what the trends or patterns of behavior were for all of our users, not just the 40 in our diary study, for example. So each method gave us insight into where the other one was lacking. The data science gave us access to the trends that were happening in user behavior, while the user research helped to explain why those trends were happening and how it felt to get these ads and messages in their day-to-day experiences. And together, that became a really powerful combination, because it's in combining both insights disciplines that we were able to gain a high confidence and holistic answer to that question that we started with at the beginning, which was, what is the ad and message experience like for Spotify for listeners? And even more importantly, this is how we were able to actually work with leadership, because it's highly unlikely that leadership, if they had this question in the first place, would have been able to ask the data science team what they thought, and then ask the user research team what they thought, and make sense of it in case if it conflicted or anything like that. But arguably, these teams probably wouldn't be doing that same type of research either. So it's in doing this multidisciplinary research that we become a one-stop shop for leadership. And that's really important, because leaders don't have the time or the ability to go to every insights team and coordinate their research roadmaps to be able to make sense of some of these larger strategic questions. We need to do that work for them and be a one-stop shop for insights for leadership. So multidisciplinary research is really what gets this flywheel spinning, because it's through doing multidisciplinary research that we're able to generate comprehensive answers to those really big, scary strategic questions that we start with at the beginning of a project. And we become a one-stop shop for leadership in terms of insights and future decision making. Let's dig into the last component or the last ingredient in strategic research. And this is generating product and business impact from our research. So as we mentioned, typically user research lives on the product side of organizations. But I think there's a lot of value and a lot of opportunity for research to spread into the product and business organizations within a company, because users are at the center of all that we do. It's their experience that they have with interactions with products, and it's those experiences and product interactions that ultimately generate a business outcome, as we saw in the flow at the beginning of this talk. So some questions that our team often asks ourselves are things like, do we understand how revenue is being made from these product interactions? Do we know what our business model is, and do we know how user interactions actually generate revenue for us as a company? A second question to ask yourself is how these product teams connect with business teams. So I mean this on an organizational standpoint. Are these teams connected? Do they talk a lot? Are they in the same org structure? Or would you have to pass your research along to these different people in order to get all the teams engaged? So it's really important that we understand the connection between users, product, and business, both externally, meaning how our business model works and how that ultimately reflects in our bottom line, and internally, meaning our organizational structure and what that means for how you have to conduct and share your research findings. Because ultimately, in connecting the users to the product experiences to the business outcomes, that means you can reach a wider audience with your research. You're not just addressing the product teams and their implications, you're also finding implications to business teams and creating a wider audience at the entire company for your research and your findings. So let's wrap up this ads and messaging research example. Remember, the research question that we're after is, what is the experience of ads and messages for our Spotify free listeners? As a result of this research, we identified several pain points within this cohesive experience of ads and messages. So what we ended up doing was mapping those pain points to the engineering systems that operated the ads and messaging systems, and to the revenue systems that generated revenue from these different product interactions. And that meant that we not only had the eyes and ears of people on the product team, we also had the eyes and ears of people on the business team as well, who really wanted to understand our listeners, their pain points and their experiences, and what that meant for our engineering systems and our business or our revenue systems as well. Ultimately, as a result of this research, we were able to generate a new business unit level objective for 2020. So what this means was that because of what we had learned about the user experience of ads and messages, we had enough fodder to make the case for unifying the ads and messaging experience and the resulting teams internally as well. Because we feel it's really important to have a deep understanding of our users, and being able to map that internally to our organizational structure such that we're thinking about these experiences as they do is really important. So in this new 2020 business unit level objective, we were able to bridge these teams and create cohesive strategy across what used to be disparate teams, which resulted in more cohesive engineering systems and ML systems as well, therefore unifying the Spotify free listener experience as well. And I think we were able to do this because we were able to generate product and business implications from our same set of findings. And thus we were able to reach a wider audience with our research than if we had just focused on product teams alone. And that enabled us to generate wider company level impact. And that's the final push in our flywheel. And I think this is really important because if you demonstrate to your product and business executives or leadership teams that you're able to, through rigorous research, answer their biggest questions about where the business unit or company should be focused and how to actually execute on those goals, they'll come right back to you with their next set of open questions because it'll give them data-driven direction into their goals and long-term vision for the team and the company. So let's revisit the question that we started with, which is, what if we lived in a world where research defined company level strategy? How would that look? What would that feel like? And most importantly, what changes would you need to make to your team, your organization, your practice, your methods as a researcher in order to make this a reality? And I think the key here is strategic research, which really means two key things. Research that defines new strategy for your business unit or your company, and research that enables the existing strategy to be course corrected, changed, or augmented because of your research. That's what the output of strategic research actually is. And I think you can do it too through these three ingredients that make that flywheel. The first step is identifying the gaps in strategy, whether that's because the strategy doesn't exist for this particular opportunity space, or because we don't exactly know how to implement or execute on the existing strategy. Those are really great areas to dig in with future research. Proactively identifying the right research questions and designing a research project around answering and giving more data-driven clarity to those open questions. That will help executives create long-term goals and strategies that are backed by evidence and data, whether that's qualitative, quantitative, or both. The second important ingredient in strategic research is doing multidisciplinary research. So this means partnering with complementary insights partners, whether that's user research, data science, behavioral science, market research, data visualization, the list goes on and on. But it's really about finding that true insights partner for that particular research question at hand. This can differ depending on any sort of research question you might have, but the important part is finding the right insights partner to generate comprehensive answers, because those nebulous questions can't be answered by one insights discipline alone. There are too many caveats or limitations in each insights discipline that once you combine them together actually get mitigated, because you're able to harness the strengths and the superpowers of each insights discipline together. And that is what really generates comprehensive answers or true data-driven direction to a large and scary open question. And lastly, it's about driving product and business impact from your research. So this expands your influence from your research just pertaining to the product teams to also having an audience in business teams as well. and that your research can impact the decisions that product and business leaders make together, creating wider, almost company level impact from your research project alone. So, putting all three ingredients together, it's about identifying gaps in current strategy to proactively identify the right research questions to tackle. It's then about designing a multidisciplinary study to generate comprehensive answers to that big, nebulous, open question. And lastly, it's about finding product and business impact from your findings in order to speak to a wider audience at the company. And in doing so, creating a flywheel effect where the more hairy, scary strategic questions you unpack and really create data-driven direction from, the more leaders will turn to you and ask for the next set of questions that they need answer to and direction from. And I think that's how we build a future together, where research is at the center of defining and enabling company and business unit level strategy. That's how we build a better future for research and for our companies, and I think we can do that together. Thank you.